Hello there, and welcome to Dream Past Diaries. I'm truly glad you've made it here. Maybe it's been a long day, or maybe you're the kind of dreamer who prefers to drift off to the sound of quiet thoughts and forgotten mysteries instead of counting sheep. Either way, tonight's story is yours to enjoy. You don't have to do anything now, just rest. Let your thoughts slow, your breath deepen, and your body grow lighter, as if gravity itself has begun to fade away.
In the slow, unhurried dawn that crept over ancient Rome, when the first pale strands of light slipped across the tiled rooftops and lingered on the marble edges of temples still heavy with the quiet of night, the daily rhythm of the city always began earlier for some than for others, and perhaps nowhere was this early stillness felt more deeply than within the gentle enclosure of the House of the Vestals, a place set apart from the louder pulse of the city and wrapped in a silence that seemed to stretch through centuries, whispering of duties that were older than many of the buildings that surrounded it. The Vestal Virgins, who lived within these sacred walls, were women chosen not merely for their youth or purity but for the strange and solemn vocation of tending a flame, an ordinary flame in appearance, faintly flickering, warm and soft, yet considered by the Romans to be nothing less than the symbolic heartbeat of the entire city, a fire whose steady glow represented Rome's continuity, Rome's safety, and Rome's collective spirit. And because of this, every dawn in the House of the Vestals unfolded with the same slow, careful, ritualistic quiet that had unfolded for centuries before. The corridors, long and colonnaded, carried the faint scent of ancient stone warmed by the night's lingering air, and the young women who paced them each morning walked with steps neither hurried nor hesitant but deliberate, for there was no rush within these sacred boundaries. Everything here was done slowly, methodically, as though the very air demanded softness and caution, and so the Vestals awakened gradually, washing their faces with water that had been drawn the evening before, brushing the dust from their pale linen stolas, and adjusting the simple but symbolic bands of cloth that held their hair in place, each gesture repeating itself day after day until it formed a kind of quiet choreography passed from one generation of priestesses to the next. Their primary duty, the tending of the sacred flame in the temple of Vesta nearby, seemed almost too simple to deserve such lifelong dedication, yet the Romans believed deeply that the flame's steady burning was tied directly to the fate of their city. Should it ever go out, it would not merely be an inconvenience or a momentary lapse but a spiritual catastrophe, a symbolic unraveling of Rome itself. And so the Vestals approached the fire every morning with the same soft reverence that a mother might show a sleeping child, feeding it with carefully selected pieces of sacred wood, whispering invocations that had been recited for centuries, and watching the flame respond with a gentle flare that signified its acceptance of their offerings. But the Vestals' responsibilities extended far beyond the flame, for they were also caretakers of sacred objects, guardians of ancient rites, witnesses to important legal documents, and symbols of moral purity whose presence at public ceremonies was believed to bring good fortune and divine approval. And because of this, their lives were both remarkably quiet and unexpectedly influential, a paradox that shaped their existence with a constant, steady pressure. In the long, slow hours of the morning, after the flame had been tended and the courtyard swept of leaves that drifted down from the old, carefully pruned trees, the Vestals often engaged in simple, repetitive tasks that filled their days with a sense of calm predictability, organizing scrolls within the archives, preparing ritual substances for future ceremonies, mending their garments with patient, even stitches, or simply walking beneath the shaded porticos, their hands folded before them, their minds dwelling on the soft rhythms of duty, tradition, and the passing of time. The air within the House of the Vestals always carried a peculiar sense of stillness, as though everything within its boundaries was suspended in a gentle, perpetual pause, separate from the bustling city just beyond its outer wall, where merchants called out their wares, pots clattered in workshops, and the streets filled with both the mundane and the chaotic. But inside this sanctuary, sound itself seemed softened, slowed, rounded into a calming monotony. Because the Vestals were sworn to 30 years of service, 10 years of learning, 10 years of performing, and 10 years of teaching, the days stretched out before them in a long, wide landscape of time that changed only in the smallest and most gradual ways, and perhaps it was this very slowness that defined their lives more than any ritual, for they existed in a world of repetition, of gentle duties performed again and again, each day blending softly into the next until their entire service became a long, unbroken flow. The citizens of Rome often saw the Vestals only at festivals or during official ceremonies, where their white garments, calm expressions, and measured movements seemed almost otherworldly compared to the lively world around them. And because of this distant familiarity, Romans held them in a mixture of reverence and awe, believing that the favor of Vesta, goddess of the hearth, was reflected through the steady devotion of her priestesses. Thus, as the morning sun slowly warmed the marble columns of the House of the Vestals and cast gentle shadows across its courtyard, the young women continued their rituals without haste or urgency, embodying a living continuity that stretched back to the earliest days of Rome, each motion, each breath, each quiet step contributing to the preservation of a flame that symbolized far more than its light or heat, a flame that represented the very soul of a civilization built on lineage, tradition, and the belief that some things, kept carefully and faithfully, could protect an entire people for generations. The life of a Vestal Virgin, though often spoken of in whispered tones of respect throughout ancient Rome, unfolded not in dramatic rituals or grand ceremonies but in a long, measured sequence of years that drifted by with a kind of gentle sameness, and nowhere was this more apparent than in the 30-year arc of service that shaped each woman's destiny from the moment she entered the House of the Vestals, an arc divided into 3 broad stages: 10 years of learning, 10 years of performing, and 10 years of teaching, each blending quietly into the next until the boundaries between them softened like footprints fading under layers of settled dust. These 30 years were not marked by excitement or dramatic shifts, but by a soothing monotony that wrapped itself around the daily existence of the Vestals, creating a life that felt almost timeless, as if held suspended between the cycles of the wider world. And it was during the first decade that the young novices, often chosen between the ages of 6 and 10, found themselves slowly adjusting to their new roles, their early days filled with gentle instruction rather than rigorous study. 4. The older Vestals knew that learning in this sacred space was meant to be absorbed gradually, quietly, through repetition and lived experience rather than through pressure or haste. These novices spent long hours observing older priestesses as they tended the sacred flame, memorizing the sequence of movements, the posture of respect, the rhythm of adding wood, the correct way to whisper invocations, and over time the young girls came to view the fire almost as a companion, its soft crackling and warm glow creating a sense of reassurance in the quiet mornings and the long afternoons when sunlight filtered into the temple in thin, steady beams that illuminated the dust motes, drifting lazily through the air. In the second decade of service, the Vestals entered their period of full duty, taking on the responsibility of performing rituals themselves, maintaining the temple's sacred objects, preparing offerings, and participating in public ceremonies where their presence symbolized purity and divine protection. Yet even these tasks, which outsiders sometimes romanticized as grand, were carried out with a gentleness that stripped them of any grandeur and made them part of a calm routine, a series of repetitions that the Vestals approached with the same quiet focus they applied to more mundane tasks like sweeping the temple floor or caring for the small garden within their atrium. And then came the third decade, when the Vestals, now more experienced and perhaps more reflective, shifted into the role of teachers, guiding the next generation with soft-spoken advice, demonstrating proper ritual form, correcting small mistakes with patience rather than sharpness, and ensuring that the continuity of their service remained unbroken, as smooth and steady as the flame they tended. In this phase, the sense of time often deepened, for teaching required the older Vestals to remember their own early years, and in remembering, many of them became keenly aware of how gently the years had drifted past, how seamlessly one stage of life had blended into another. Throughout all 3 decades, the House of the Vestals remained a sanctuary of stillness, its long hallways echoing softly with footsteps that never hurried, its gardens filled with the steady rustling of leaves stirred by mild breezes, its chambers lit not with bright torches but with the soft, steady glow of small lamps that created an atmosphere of unbroken calm. And though the world outside continued its cycles of noise and commerce, of political debates and marketplace chatter, within these sacred walls the passing of time felt less like a series of events and more like a slow-flowing river whose surface seldom rippled. Even mealtimes contributed to this atmosphere, for the Vestals ate simple foods: bread, olives, fruit, and occasionally fish or vegetables prepared in modest ways. And these meals were taken quietly, not out of strict rule but because the rhythm of the place itself seemed to encourage gentle conversation or thoughtful silence. And as they ate, the priestesses often found themselves reflecting on the day's small tasks, the minor rituals completed, the courtyard swept, the flame trimmed and fed, the small offerings prepared for future ceremonies. Many Romans believed that the Vestals lived privileged lives because they were granted rights few women possessed, such as owning property, making legal decisions, and moving freely through the city. But from within the House of the Vestals, these privileges were not experienced as luxuries so much as quiet extensions of their role, responsibilities that flowed naturally from the reverence placed upon them. And though they occasionally left their sanctuary to participate in civic events, they always returned to the same calming stillness, the same familiar routines, the same soft patterns of duty that shaped their days. In this way, the 30 years of service became a long, unbroken arc of dedication, a life defined not by dramatic choices or sudden changes, but by the gentle repetition of tasks so old and so sacred that they seem to exist outside the normal boundaries of time. And by the end of these 3 decades, many Vestals found that their memories of the years had settled into a kind of warm blur, a soft tapestry woven from countless mornings of tending the flame, countless afternoons spent teaching. Novices, countless evenings spent walking beneath the quiet colonnades, while the city's distant sounds merged into a hum that had become as familiar as breath. Thus, the 30-year path of a Vestal Virgin was not merely a commitment but a surrender to slowness, to steadiness, to the ancient belief that some forms of. The Temple of Vesta, though modest in size compared to the sprawling structures that lined the Roman Forum, carried a presence far greater than its physical form, and its quiet architecture played an essential role in shaping the daily rhythm of the Vestal Virgins, for it was within its circular walls that the sacred flame lived and breathed, flickering gently against the curved interior that held centuries of whispered prayers and soft footsteps. The temple's round shape, unusual in a city fond of rectangular symmetry, symbolized continuity and the unbroken cycle of Rome's existence. And because this shape allowed no corners where shadows could gather, the interior always felt evenly lit, calm, and softly balanced, as though the structure itself were designed to encourage stillness. Even the stone of the walls seemed to give off a faintly muted echo, as if absorbing sound rather than reflecting it. And in this softened acoustics, the Vestals found a feeling of gentle enclosure, a sense that every movement, every breath, was held within a timeless embrace. The roof, supported by slender columns, allowed light to sink slowly into the temple from above, and this filtered light often gave the flame a layered glow, pale near the base, golden around the center, and occasionally touched by drifting shadows near its upper tips, creating a visual rhythm that the Vestals observed quietly each day, noting the subtle changes in tone as the sun shifted across the sky, making the simple act of watching the flame feel like an act of meditation. The hearth itself, built from smooth stones worn by generations of tending, stood on a slightly raised platform, and the Vestals approached it with slow, practiced steps, the faint rustle of their robes mingling with the soft crackle of firewood. And because their movements were so repetitive, so carefully measured, they became almost a kind of choreography performed without thought, guided instead by memory and the subtle weight of tradition. Surrounding the hearth were various sacred objects, small vessels for ritual offerings, tools for adjusting the fire, containers of carefully selected wood, each placed in a specific position that never changed, for the temple's interior followed a layout so fixed and venerable that altering anything would have felt like disturbing the rhythm of the flame itself, and thus the space remained constant through generations, its unchanging order offering the Vestals a sense of stability and calm. Their mornings spent within the temple often stretched into long hours of tending, cleaning, preparing, and observing, yet the tasks never felt rushed or demanding, for the architecture encouraged slowness. The columns cast long, gentle shadows that shifted as the day passed. The circular space created a natural flow that guided movement without pressure, and even the scent of the place, the blend of warm stone, faint ash, and light incense, seemed to settle itself in layers, contributing to the temple's steady, restful atmosphere. Outside, the forum might be alive with merchants shouting prices, magistrates debating, or senators walking with purposeful strides, but inside the Temple of Vesta this noise softened into a distant murmur that sometimes blended with the rustle of leaves in the nearby sacred grove, and the Vestals, accustomed to the contrast between the city's energy and their temple's tranquility, learned to let the hum of life beyond the doorway fade into the background of their thoughts, like an endless, calming tide that never disturbed the stillness within. The entrance, marked by a modest threshold, acted almost like a boundary between two worlds, the world of Rome's constant motion and the world of careful ritual, and crossing it each morning reminded the Vestals that their duties were not merely tasks but acts of preservation, maintaining the symbolic anchor of the city's identity. The temple floors, cool beneath their sandaled feet, were swept daily with quiet, repetitive motions that stirred only the thinnest layer of dust, and these simple acts of cleaning became as meditative as tending the flame itself, for each small gesture reinforced a sense of order, of predictability, of gentle continuity that framed their days. As the sun moved higher in the sky, the interior would warm slightly, though never uncomfortably so, and the Vestals could feel the temperature shift subtly against the stone walls, a familiar sensation that marked the passage of time more reliably than any sundial. And in these gradual shifts the women found comfort, for their lives were built around such gentle transitions rather than abrupt changes. When ceremonies were scheduled, they prepared offerings, grains, salted flour, or small symbolic items, with slow, deliberate motions, arranging everything on ritual trays whose surfaces had been polished smooth by centuries of use, and even the act of placing objects felt calm and rhythmic, as though the temple's architecture encouraged precision through its quiet presence. Once ceremonies concluded, the flame was checked again, It would replenish if necessary, and the Vestals would take a few more moments to observe its steady glow, ensuring that its light remained constant before stepping away. Even this final glance felt sacred, part of a long line of identical gestures repeated by countless priestesses before them, binding their present moment to an unbroken chain of history. And so the Temple of Vesta remained not merely a building but a sanctuary shaped by time, ritual, and architectural intensity. Life within the House of the Vestal Virgins unfolded not through moments of significance or sudden change, but through a long, stretched-out sequence of small, carefully repeated rituals that filled each day with a gentle sense of order, and nowhere was this quiet rhythm more clearly felt than in the atrium at the center of their residence. A broad open space surrounded by columns whose stone surfaces held the warmth of the sun during the day and released it slowly in the evenings, creating an atmosphere of steady comfort that never felt too warm or too cold. The atrium served as the soft heart of the Vestal's domestic life, and each morning, after tending the sacred flame in the temple, the priestesses would return to this inner courtyard to begin the series of small duties that shaped the rest of their day, tasks that were neither demanding nor hurried but rather gentle in nature, meant to maintain the cleanliness, order, and sacred atmosphere of the space. The ground, arranged in simple patterns of stone, needed only light sweeping, and the faint sound of brooms brushing against the floor became a familiar, repetitive whisper that echoed softly beneath the colonnades, blending with the quiet rustle of leaves from the small central garden, where a handful of carefully tended plants, herbs, small shrubs, and a few modest flowers grew in a way that reflected the Vestal's own life.